Hey, welcome back. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Bottega, the President of the Council, and I am pleased to be moderator for this next panel discussion, Democratizing Data Quality. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our panelists. If you have any questions during the session, please enter them into the chat area. To set the content for this session, I'd like to start by talking about what is the concept of democratization or data democratization? So any user in an organization should be able to easily search for, find, and use data they need to drive business value and gain a competitive advantage in their organizations. And they should be able to do this in a self-service manner without overburdensome barriers or unnecessary roadblocks. Users should no longer be required to ask and wait for help from technologists to give them access to the data, because data is an organizational asset. It's maintained in an organizational construct, and users should be confident in the quality and completeness of the data, knowing that the right policies and safeguards are in place to enable seamless yet authorized access to data, while ensuring that this data is protected and data privacy is enabled. In today's panel, we're going to talk to industry experts about what data democracy really is. Is it achievable? What are the best ways to get to the target operating environment? We're going to talk about concepts of federated data models, empowering the business versus governing via a central rule management system, why automation and self-service are key to enabling data-driven decisions, and what are some of the pros and cons of democratization, the successes and the risks. To discuss these topics, let me introduce our panel. Joining me today is Sean Keenan, executive at Sumitomo Mitsui Banking Corp, responsible for stress testing and portfolio analytics. Tom Mavroudis, VP Data Management and Enterprise Corporate Functions, Chief Data Officer at Scotiabank, and Afshin Lotfi, CEO, North America and Chief Business Development Officer at Ataccama. Good morning, gentlemen. Or good afternoon, I should say.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
All right, so let me jump in. Are you guys getting an echo, by the way? I don't know, I hope it's not affecting you.
No, it's good. It's good.
Okay, good. I'll just shut off my echo ears then. So let me bring up our panel. There's our panel today. So let me start with the first question. To paraphrase a recent Gartner analysis, democratization equals distribution across an organization. Now, if we apply this to data management, if things like data access, data ownership, data use, data quality assurance, et cetera, are all distributed across an organization, what does that mean for data management within an organization? So, Tom, I'm going to start with you. From the perspective of the data management office, how is this impacting the management of the data program? How's the CDO office allocating these responsibilities while still maintaining oversight control? Organization, what kind of structures are in place? And in a distributed self-serve paradigm, how are firms allowing greater access to data while still maintaining information security and privacy? So, Tom, here's a bunch of questions for you.
Yeah. So thanks, John. And I feel very strongly about this. So I put a few points down here, and I have what I believe, in my professional opinion, what you can democratize and what you can't. What you can't democratize. We cannot democratize the semantic meaning of concepts and terms. Otherwise, it will be apples and oranges, and we'll never be able to reuse any data that's out there in the field across. It'll be only linear for a specific use case. So that's really important. Roles and responsibilities need to also be defined and adhered to, and cannot be democratized. We can't make up roles and responsibilities. Specifically, how the ownership and the accountability of data and its specific structure. Data standards and regulatory requirements. Another thing we can't democratize, right? As a corporation, we have a set of standards, we have a policy, and we have regulatory requirements. Certain tooling that's common across the enterprise that enables a common, a common outcome, like potentially data quality tools or data quality issues management or catalog tools, or things of that nature. A common visualization where applicable. where we want our users to be able to visualize a specific result and not have to train the organization on 20 different ways of the outcome of that result. And we have one common way of visualization so that we train people, one way on how to look at things. Common data management practices. And also, in some cases, design patterns and data model patterns. Now, there's going to be, if there's a specific use case and that particular data that's being created or used is only relevant for that particular use case, and I would even argue that no data is specific for a particular use case, then maybe the design pattern of the model can be specific to that use case. But if you want to reuse data across the corporation, we should have some principles around our modeling, around our data domain, so that when we either create or we use data, we adhere to those patterns. Now, the good news, what can we democratize? Certainly implementation and building of data sets, as long as we adhere to the standards and the processes and principles that I outlined above or previously. Enrichment of data, and to your point, usage, provisioning, ethics, access controls, and as long as we have a rules-driven approach, that can absolutely be democratized. Right? And application of data governance routines absolutely can be democratized. And how do we actually do this? And I think really the fulcrum here is the key enabler is the data catalog, right? Which we need the common catalog, which would kind of inform the common glossary, the taxonomy, the use case controls for access, for provisioning points. And I think that's really the fulcrum on how we can organize our data, how we can organize the rules around that data, and really affect the democratization.
So, Tom, you mentioned saying, and I want to get the other panelists to respond to. So I agree with half of the things. The other things I would maybe disagree with you on, and let's have a debate about that. When you mentioned democratizing standards definition, absolutely, there's got to be a central location. I would agree with that. But when you talk about tooling, especially analytic tooling, isn't it important to allow your end users to have different dimensions to how they do their analytics? And I would turn to Sean on that, because Sean, you're an end user. In your firm, do you want to be able to have different ways of looking at it? So getting access to the data, but also analyzing data might be specific to your line of business. Would you agree or disagree, or how would you work through that?
Well, I do agree. I mean, I agree with everything I understood of what Tom said. I think if we're talking about data quality tooling and data management tooling, that there's an argument for consistency there. But I think from an analytic perspective, I agree with you that the users should they should be able to get the data and put it into whatever they need to put it into to do their work.
So I'll agree, and I'm agreeing with both of you.
But I also maybe wanted to add, I think we also need to maybe differentiate the difference between, cross-organization collaboration with having access to something, right? So I think when we talk about data democratization, we're probably also speaking about making sure that everybody in the organization is able to understand the data, is able to access it. Now, whether you want to provide that access to everybody at the same time, I think that's a different discussion. You may want to, for regulatory compliance purposes, or a lot of the great examples that Tom provided, you may want to provide access to only certain types of data to certain individuals. But the topic of making sure that everybody has access to the data they need, or everybody can understand what is the actual goal of the organization in terms of data culture, I think that should be a global perspective for the whole enterprise, in my opinion.
In fact, it reminds me, I'm sure you've all heard of this, the Open Data Act within the government, right? Part of that is to make information about the populace available to public, to public access. So when I think of democratization, I think of that, making data available to the end user. But the control of the data, as Tom said,
yes,
that's the story, right? Making sure that it's defined properly, it has consistent definition, and anything sensitive has to be controlled, I would assume.
No, I agree. I think that data democratization doesn't mean that you want to open the floodgates to everybody to access everything they want, but it should be a culture of allowing all users and all types of users, whether technical or business or data or non-data, to understand what is the actual goal of the organization and how they can be part of it.
So, Tom, within banks, that model kind of implies that there has to be a closer relationship between technology, the business operations, almost a kind of a partnership between that. Is that, do you see that happening in industry now? Is there getting developing closer ties between all of these different constituencies within organizations?
Yeah, and I do, John, and you know, those of us that go back several years, and I know you were one of the original people in creating data organizations, was it was the tail wagging the dog as far as I was concerned, where technology was driving the business, and now it's really the business that's driving the data, and so I still think that technology should not and does not play a huge part in this, because if we have a rules-driven approach and we define use cases and we define roles against those use cases, I think that it can be automated. So certainly, and then you factor in, you know, ethical use cases as well. I think it can be automated, and we can kind of, I don't want to say cut IT out of the loop, but I don't think that they're a big player in this. I really think that the automation is the key to this. And again, the key would be rules-driven approach, defining the use cases, the roles against those use cases, the organizations, the owners of the data. So if I'm a data steward in international banking, and I need access to a customer data set or human resources data, what's the use case? Do I have does the rule say that I have access to that use case? Yes or no? And then it's pre-provisioned. That's the way I think it should work. You know, not we're getting towards there.
Yeah, I would agree full-heartedly with that. Yes.
Yeah. Sean, as an end user, are you seeing it change? Are you seeing better access to data or not just you, but I mean,
yeah, I think it's slow. I mean, I guess my perspective is a little different. I feel like data structure has to also be understood and co-owned. I mean, the deepest core storage and retrieval, that's a science. You need just scientists for that. But as the data are staged for use and move into logical data structures, those structures need to be owned as much by the user base as by the database. And there needs to be training and back and forth in terms of the ability to modify data structures to respond to changes in the uses of the data. So I think there's a huge gap to close in this area to the benefit of at least of financial institutions, from my experience.
Yeah, someone described this once to me. We always talk about the technical people and the business people, and we like to put colors to them, right? So there's, you know, tech is blue and business people are red. You bring those two colors together, it's purple. We need more purple people.
I like that.
Right? We need more of the people who can look at both sides. And in an earlier panel, in fact, there was a use case that was brought up where in banking, what you don't want to have, obviously, is your customers leave to go to another bank, right? You want to keep your customers. And traditionally, the reaction is after they leave, they do analysis. And what they were talking about there was that there were indications and patterns along the way that could have clued the bank into knowing that this person is about to leave, right? And they weren't making that data available, not intentionally or unintentionally, but, you know, it wasn't, in other words, like that, those hidden messages weren't being exposed.
Well, so, probably John, in that case, because they didn't know that it was an important data set, right? And that's the key.
Well, and I think the whole idea of, you know, democratization of, if the business had the access to that,
absolutely,
maybe they could have prevented some of those migrations away from them, right? So there's kind of a data sharing component to this as well, right? In democratization, that if data is the asset, everybody should have access, not just the technology or the business, but both.
Right? Control access, yes.
Yeah. So, Afshin, I want to go to you because we kind of alluded to this now.
Yeah.
To me, this requires data literacy and culture change, does it not?
Well, I think data literacy is probably crucial if you want a data-driven culture. And I think it's not if, it's a must if you're a CDO. I mean, that's kind of the core initiative that you're trying to create in your enterprise. And I think Tom and Sean talked about so some of the things that we need to do to facilitate, and some things that we can and cannot do. But no matter what we're doing, we want to make sure that we have the buy-in from everybody. And in order to get this buy-in, we need to make sure that they understand what exactly they have to buy into. And this is what data literacy is about. It's about being able to expose, what is the data that we're collecting? What does it look like? Why and how is it collected? Where is it stored? Why is it stored there? What are the implications? And these all may seem, quite obvious to many of us here, but the reality is that a lot of these answers, as Tom alluded earlier, have, historically been only accessible to the technology team, if even, right? So they knew, the technology team has always, we would hope, has known why we're collecting data and how and where. But now we need to make sure that if we want buying from our non-data, let's say, team members and users, that they understand these concepts. And that's what really, I think, data literacy is. And without it, we can't really have a successful enablement of data governance, data quality, and all the other wonderful things that we talked about. So I think we need to, while we'll talk, I'm sure a lot of us will talk to you about providing access to data and making sure that you have access. Before you do that, they have to understand what exactly they're getting access to and why, and what are the implications of that. And I think that's what data literacy is really about. Just one more thing I wanted to add is that we really have seen with our customers that the vast majority of them are really looking at, and believe that having high levels of data literacy really is a critical point in being able to provide control access to data to the right people, but it's also a driving force to their data analytics strategies moving forward. Because of the examples that you provided earlier, if that piece of information was shared with a business person, they would have been able to share more insight, and this is what this is all about.
Yeah, actually, in your role within your company, I'll name you as you're a purple person, right? Because you sit between both sides. And we have on the panel, we have the red and the blue on the panel, right? We have the data person and the business person, right? So
it feels like we're all purple on this call, but yes.
But there was a question from the audience, and it says, am I hearing correctly that you would recommend technology over policy? And I don't think that's what we're saying. I think we're saying that it's a combination of the two, is it not?
I think it's debatable, and it's also debatable what we define in technology. I think that historically it's always been technology that drove this, but we're not there anymore. I think the tides are changing, and organizations are starting to understand the power of exposing this to everybody. So I think there will be a huge shift towards a new paradigm on how we expose data in a more self-service way, in a more user-friendly and beautiful way, so that everybody can consume it. I don't think personally that it would mean that technology will be completely out of it, but I think that user will no longer or should no longer be dependent on technology to do what they need to do. And it could be a cooperation, not a dependency between the two teams. And I'll leave it for others to comment as well.
Well, let me go into the next point I want to make, and the title of this session is Democratizing Data Quality. Right. So we'll take what we just talked about and extend that into data quality. And I guess my question would be, is that even achievable? Right? Who's accountable? You need somebody accountable. Who's accountable when, say, the auditors and the regulators come knocking? Right. And what are some of the best practices to enable that capability? And actually, I'm going to go back to you just in terms of who when you talk to your customers. Who do you see stepping up to take accountability for data quality?
Well, I think there's two answers to what you're asking. I think in terms of who's accountable when the regulators come knocking, I don't think that will be much different than what it is today. I think we're just empowering people to have more information to be able to tackle those situations. And I think Sean and Tom can probably comment better than me on that front. I think that we're talking about data democratization, but I think it's much bigger than that. We're really talking about data access, data governance, data quality, and when we want to include this new type of users in this new paradigm, as I mentioned before, it's really hard to get buy-in when we're exposing them to really bad quality data. And Tom talked about the importance of data catalog and data classification. Those are critical, but without data quality, from my experience and our clients' experience, you really don't go really far. I don't think it's a question of whether data quality is part of it. I think it's fundamental for the success of any initiative, whether it's whether we're talking about collaborating together between business and technology, or we're talking about data compliance or what else.
Well, I'll be the instigator here between Tom and Sean now. So Tom, you're the data office person. What can you do? And I've seen this myself. The business will blame the tech people or data people for bad data quality, and then the tech people and data people will blame the business for that bad data quality. So what's the magic formula? How do you get improved quality through collaboration between business and data?
So I think that, again, this is another thing that I feel very strongly about, and we're implementing these procedures and routines. I think the consumers of the data are responsible and accountable for identifying the fit for purpose criteria and the controls that need to be applied. I think that the producers of the data are responsible and accountable for the data that they produce, and they need to apply those controls and routines on the data that they produce. And those data stewards are supported by, in our environment, and we did this at multiple banks, the data steward, the source data steward, is supported by what we call an IT custodian, which is the IT system owner in regular terms, and the business process owner. But that's the three-legged stool. But the main leg of that stool is the business data steward, not the IT system owner. And so you create data. You don't. Today, it's not in the culture of people that create data think they own it, but they do own it, and they're responsible for implementing the proper controls as defined by. They should be defining controls on what's fit for purpose, but also they need to accept those controls as defined by the ultimate consumers of that data, apply those controls. That's not to say that we shouldn't have belt and suspenders. The consumers also need to apply those controls at the consumption point to make sure, again, the data traverses. Data has a life cycle to make sure along the way from origination to ultimate consumption that nothing happened or whatever happened, they can measure it. So I think it's 2 points: ultimate consumption and at the origination.
So Tom, to add one thing to Tom is I think that's absolutely on point. But what we need to do is also to enable these consumers and these producers to actually create this type of controls, data quality controls, data governance controls, access controls. So I think it's a new way of looking at things, and I think it will provide a lot of benefits. But we need to enable these users to be able to do so.
Yeah.
Well, that was the point I was going to make to Sean. Is there has always been that push and the pull, right? Of the data people saying, listen, business has to really define what's good, right? And I think business has now taken on that accountability. But Sean, what do you see in terms of the training and education on the business side? Are they able, do they have the skill set to do that, or are they actually even empowered to do that?
Well, if I could answer in two parts. I mean, the last part first. I mean, many of us have worked in institutions where there's mandatory training quarterly on all kinds of topics, mandatory read this. That's part of your job. Very little mandatory training on data structure, how the institution manages data, its philosophy. So that's a gap that I think can be filled. But I think that the cultural gap is sort of embedded in the data user, data provider model. So, I mean, as we go forward, the sources of data are going to continue to expand. So there's going to be more data coming into the institution from external sources. That's one thing. And then while this isn't data in a strict sense, there is going to be a continued growth in the output of modeled quantities that are produced by models, and they're still stored and they're still reported on, and they still have downstream uses just like true data. So like our group, for example, we're users, but we're producers too. I mean, our outputs get stored. So I think breaking down that user producer, cultural divide is part of the way forward for democratizing data quality.
No, I think that's a great point. It's again, it's an overused expression. It takes a village, but it does, right? Because everybody has to be involved in it. In fact, Tom, I'll direct this towards you. I know myself, my own experience. I don't know of any profession where your success depends on people who don't report to you.
Right.
That's interesting.
And how do you incentivize the populace, if you will, within an organization to do things that you have no? Now, I should stop and say that there is policy and audit and things like that, but what's the right model? How do you incentivize the organization to take accountability for data and data quality?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of answers. There's no easy answer, but there's a lot of different techniques to use, right? I like to say we're making people drink cough medicine, and they don't want to, right? I mean, these programs always start out and they have a regulatory mandate, and that's the big stick, but that only lasts for so long, and then it kind of loses its wind, and then the sales become dull, right? And so I think part of it is embedding culture and identifying, and some of that is identifying throughout the corporation what your actions are in creating data have downstream and upstream effects, and that you need to do the right thing for the corporation. And I think so. Part of that is an educational and a cultural thing, and like I said, the regulatory piece, and also really the cultural initiative has to start from the very, very top. So it's not an easy. There's a lot of different tactics, but you have to use all of them in your bag of tricks to convince people that this is important and they need to pay attention. And the key thing is, and I like to use the three bears paradigm. You cannot, in the days of DMM, the data maturity model, when a company says, I'm taking their entire company to level 4, that's eating the entire elephant. That's never going to work. So you have to prioritize, scope and prioritize your initiatives, and get people on through socialization, through different techniques, and get people excited about data in general.
So we, believe it or not, we're running out of time. At 30 minutes flew by, so I'm going to have to just go around the room real quick. And a lot of questions, and we'll try to answer them, post the session. But last question, 1 minute each. Why is data democratization so important now? And Sean, let me start with you.
Because there's opportunity. I mean, the world is changing. The way institutions use data is changing. Pre-COVID, everybody was talking big data, artificial intelligence. That's not gonna go away. So I think there's opportunity, commercial opportunity, and we want to take advantage of it.
That's it. Afshin, what do you think? What are you seeing with your customers?
Well, I kind of agree with Sean. My answer is because we can, right? We finally can. I think we have, the data volumes are large where there's a need, but there's also an ability to actually deal with it, right? So Tom alluded earlier to automation. I think that's a crucial aspect. We didn't get to discuss it much, but it's a crucial aspect of this. And we have tools that are now more beautiful, more user-friendly, more geared towards non-technical users, and that would allow us to get us to where we want to get.
And Tom, final word?
Yeah, so as we're all aware that there's data, it's exponential growth in data, and to leverage all of this and to monetize it, we have to spread it out, and we have to democratize the use of that data, provided that it meets this with the standards and all the routines and all of that. But we're not going to succeed as organizations, if we silo things. It's just not going to work.
Gentlemen, listen, thanks. This was like a speed dating thing. I
know, it was a lot. It was a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ataccama. If you want to find out more about Ataccama, there's their connect point. And again, I want to thank my panelists and, of course, Ataccama for sponsoring this event. Jump into the next session. The next session, in fact, Elation is going to talk about Tales from the Trenches on CDMC, which is our cloud data management, and Informatica is where I'm running to right now, is going to talk about cloud readiness. So thank you, gentlemen, and we'll see you in the next session.
Thank you, John. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, John. Bye.